Gemini. I feel like something is slowly being revealed behind the scenes of this connection. There's something very unusual about the energy surrounding this reading. It feels like someone is beginning to look at everything from a completely different perspective than they did before. It's almost as if they're stepping back far enough to see the bigger picture for the first time. Because the truth is, this person has heard a lot of stories, a lot of opinions, a lot of comments from people around them. And what's interesting is, the more distance they create, the more they start realizing that not everything they once believed was actually true. I also pick up on a strong energy around conversations that happened when Gemini wasn't in the room. Things were said, observations were shared, certain narratives were repeated, and little by little, some truths seem to be finding their way to the surface. Wow! That's what makes this energy feel so significant. Because this isn't just about what was said. It's about who was influencing the story all along. So the question becomes, who has really been shaping the way this person sees you? Who has had a voice in their ear throughout all this time? And what is making them suddenly question the entire version of events they once accepted as fact? Gemini, the very first card that comes through for me is the Hermit card. And honestly, this doesn't feel like the energy of someone rushing towards something. If anything, it feels like someone has been pulling away from a lot of outside noise. It seems like they've entered a period of real quiet. Not because they don't care, not because they're ready to give up. I just feel like they're exhausted, tired of hearing so many opinions. Tired of everyone having their own version of the story. Tired of trying to figure out what's true when every voice seems to be saying something different. And what's interesting is, this doesn't feel like someone searching for answers outside of themselves anymore. It feels more like someone finally realizing that the answers they've been looking for may only appear when everything becomes quiet enough to hear them. The Nine of Wands card comes through right beside that energy, and it immediately draws my attention somewhere else. This person has been carrying a lot for a very long time, and I don't think it's just work stress or everyday responsibilities. This feels emotional. It's almost like they've been trying to stay guarded, trying to stay logical, trying to remind themselves not to feel too much, not to trust too much, not to let their heart take the lead. But something is changing. Some of you may have already felt the distance between yourself and this person lately. Maybe they've been less present, less proactive, less expressive. And honestly, I don't feel like that silence is entirely about Gemini. I think it's more about what's happening inside of them. Because I keep picking up on conversations. A lot of conversations. People giving advice. People sharing opinions. People offering their perspective on Gemini. And the thing is, it feels like this person listened to all of it, maybe too much. To the point where other people's voices became louder than their own intuition. And that may be part of why everything became so complicated. Because when too many people are telling the same story, sometimes the truth gets buried underneath it. You know, there's another energy here that feels very significant. Someone has been talking about Gemini. Not once, not twice. More than this person may even realize. It's almost like Gemini's name kept coming up over and over again. At first, they may not have thought much of it. Maybe they assumed it was harmless, just casual opinions, random observations, nothing important. But over time, something started feeling off. Something didn't quite fit. Like pieces of a puzzle that refused to connect properly. Like certain things they were being told didn't match what they had personally experienced when it came to Gemini. And that's where the Ace of Swords card begins to appear in this energy. Not as some dramatic revelation. Not as a truth suddenly dropped into their lap. It feels more like the moment someone starts asking questions. Is what I've been hearing actually true? Have I been seeing this person through my own experiences? Or through someone else's perspective? And those are very different questions. Very different. I feel like this person is beginning to understand that difference. They're revisiting old conversations. Revisiting old advice. Revisiting stories they've been told. And quietly wondering why some of those things never sat right with them in the first place. Gemini, this energy feels like someone slowly walking out of a room filled with noise. A room full of opinions. A room full of assumptions. A room full of people convinced they know what's best. But once the door closes and everything becomes still, this person starts hearing a different voice. Not the voice of friends. Not the voice of family. Not the voice of people who always seem to have something to say about their life, but their own voice. And wow, it feels like that moment alone is beginning to change far more inside of them than they ever expected. There's another detail here that I find really interesting. This person isn't just reevaluating their own thoughts. They're also beginning to reevaluate the people who helped shape those thoughts in the first place. because it feels like there was someone who always seemed to appear whenever Gemini became the topic of conversation. Maybe it was a friend, maybe a family member, maybe someone who once had feelings for them, or maybe just someone who always wanted a voice in their life. And the strange thing is, this person always seemed to have something to say about Gemini, always an opinion, always a perspective, always some kind of warning. At first, it probably sounded reasonable, caring even, almost like they were trying to protect them. But once enough silence entered the situation, this person started looking back on those conversations through a completely different lens. I feel like they're remembering little moments. The times someone quickly changed the subject whenever Gemini came up. The times someone rushed to a conclusion before they had a chance to form their own opinion. The times someone focused heavily on the negatives while conveniently overlooking anything positive. And honestly, these weren't huge red flags. They were subtle, small enough that they went unnoticed at the time. But once you see them, it's hard to unsee them. The Seven of Swords card comes through here, and it gives me the feeling that not everything being said was coming from a completely pure place. I'm not talking about some elaborate scheme. I'm not talking about some grand conspiracy. This feels much more subtle than that. A comment here, a suggestion there, a carefully placed thought, almost like someone planting little seeds of doubt and then stepping back to watch them grow on their own. What's interesting is that this person didn't recognize it right away. They trusted the source. They believed this individual was being honest. They believed they were simply sharing a personal perspective. But I feel a growing discomfort inside them now, because the more they observe Gemini from a distance, the more they realize something isn't adding up. Gemini doesn't behave the way they were told. Gemini doesn't carry the energy they were led to believe. There's a noticeable gap between the story and the reality, and that gap is forcing them to ask some difficult questions. You know, there's another layer here that feels even deeper. It feels like the person who constantly talked about Gemini may have been carrying a very strong emotion underneath their words, something unresolved, some kind of insecurity, or maybe a need to control how everything turned out. Because here's the thing. Jealousy doesn't always show up in obvious ways. Sometimes it disguises itself as advice. Sometimes it looks like concern. Sometimes it sounds like someone who always has an opinion about another person's life. And I think this person is beginning to recognize that. They're beginning to realize that not every comment they heard was actually about Gemini. Some of those comments may have reflected the fears of the person speaking. Some may have come from wounds that never fully healed. Some may have come from a fear of losing their place in this person's life. And honestly, that's not an easy realization, because once you recognize that someone has influenced the way you viewed another person for a long time, you're forced to confront some uncomfortable questions. What's real? What's exaggerated? What's fact? And what's simply the perspective of someone carrying emotions they never dealt with? I feel like this process is making them more aware than they've been in a very long time. They're looking at everything with clearer eyes, more honest eyes. And those eyes aren't focused only on Gemini anymore. They're also turning toward the person who has quietly occupied so much space in this story for such a long time. It almost feels like what confuses them most isn't what was said. It's how everything started fitting together afterward. You know that feeling when something suddenly becomes clear? Not because someone sat down and explained it to you. Not because you spent hours trying to figure it out. But because one day the pieces simply begin finding their own place. I feel like that's exactly what this person is experiencing. A conversation, a comment that seemed completely ordinary. A piece of information they happened to overhear. Or maybe just the way someone reacted whenever Gemini's name came up. Little things, small things. But somehow, all of it is creating a much bigger shift inside of them. Because there was a moment when they realized that some people weren't just sharing an opinion. They were shaping a perception. And those are two very different things. When someone shares an opinion, they leave room for you to decide what you believe. When someone is shaping a perception, they're hoping you'll see things through their eyes instead of your own. And I feel like this person is beginning to recognize that line. The Judgment card comes through here almost like a bell ringing somewhere deep inside their mind. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet awakening. A realization that they may have overlooked more signs than they originally thought. There were things they once accepted as truth, stories they trusted without questioning, narratives they repeated to themselves over and over again. But when they look back now, they don't feel nearly as certain anymore. And honestly, I sense a little disappointment here. Not disappointment toward Gemini. This feels more like disappointment in themselves. Like they're wondering why they didn't look closer. why they didn't trust their intuition sooner, why they allowed outside voices to carry so much weight in their decision-making. And that's not an easy feeling to sit with, because when you realize you've been viewing someone through another person's lens, you're forced to face the possibility that you may not have seen them fairly at all. And I think that's part of what's happening here. The Justice card carries a very different kind of energy. This doesn't feel like revenge. It doesn't feel like conflict. It doesn't feel like somebody winning and somebody losing. It feels like balance slowly returning. Like the truth is finally finding its own place. Personal emotions are beginning to separate from objective reality. Things rooted in jealousy start revealing themselves as jealousy. Things rooted in control start revealing themselves as control. And this person seems to be seeing that one piece at a time. What's interesting is I also feel like they know more than Gemini realizes, more than they've ever let on. Maybe they heard something. Maybe somebody accidentally revealed more than they intended to. Or maybe they simply noticed contradictions within the same story. Either way, the more they learn, the quieter they become. Not the silence of indifference. Not the silence of someone who doesn't care. This is the silence of observation, listening, watching, paying attention to who remains consistent with their words, paying attention to who changes the narrative every time circumstances change, paying attention to who genuinely cares about them and who only cares about controlling the outcome. Gemini, I keep feeling this growing gap between what this person was told about you and what they're beginning to discover for themselves. And that gap seems to get wider every day, wider, clearer, harder to ignore. Because once a person starts seeing things with their own eyes, it's very difficult to go back to seeing them through someone else's story. And some truths, well, once you see them clearly enough, it's almost impossible to fully believe the old version ever again. What stands out to me the most is that after all the questions running through this person's mind, their attention doesn't seem to be focused on what other people have said anymore. It's starting to focus on Gemini. Not the Gemini they've heard stories about. Not the Gemini they've seen through someone else's perspective. But the Gemini they've observed for themselves. And honestly, I feel like that's what's creating such a profound shift. Because sometimes we think we understand someone. But the truth is, we're only familiar with the version of them that was described to us by somebody else. This energy feels like someone finally recognizing that difference. I keep seeing the image of a person stepping back far enough to simply observe, no longer trying to analyze everything, no longer searching for evidence, no longer asking everyone else what they think. They're just watching. And the more they watch, the more they realize Gemini isn't who they imagined. The first thing that seems to catch their attention is your calmness. Gemini doesn't appear to spend much energy on silent competitions. You don't seem interested in proving you're right. You don't seem interested in winning arguments that ultimately don't matter. It feels like you have far more important things to focus on, and honestly, I think that surprises them. Because sometimes the most mature people in the room aren't the ones speaking the loudest. They're the ones who don't feel the need to explain themselves to everyone. The star card comes through here like a very soft light, not blinding, not dramatic. Just noticeable enough that people can't ignore its presence. I feel like this person is beginning to see qualities in Gemini that they may have overlooked before. Your sincerity, your authenticity, your unique intelligence. The kind of intelligence that doesn't need to announce itself. The kind that simply reveals itself over time. Some of you may not even realize this about yourselves. But in this person's eyes, Gemini appears highly adaptable, quick-minded, flexible, able to read a situation with surprising accuracy, knowing when to move forward, knowing when to remain quiet, knowing when something deserves your energy and when it doesn't. And that creates a very specific kind of attraction. Not the kind that demands attention the moment you walk into a room. It's more subtle than that. It's the kind of presence that makes someone want to keep watching, keep learning, keep understanding. Because the longer they observe, the more there seems to be beneath the surface. I'm also picking up on another side of Gemini that this person is starting to recognize. A very grounded side, a very real side, a very dependable side. The Queen of Pentacles card and the King of Pentacles card appear together here, and they make me feel like this person is realizing that Gemini isn't driven by emotion alone. There's substance here, responsibility, purpose. There are things being built behind the scenes that don't need an audience. Maybe it's your career. Maybe it's your family. Maybe it's personal goals. Maybe it's your own growth journey. Whatever it is, this person seems to be noticing a level of stability they didn't fully see before. And honestly, I think that's what surprises them the most. Because there may have been a time when they viewed Gemini as someone constantly changing, always moving. always difficult to predict. But the more they've observed, the more they realize that beneath all of that movement is someone who is actually very consistent when it comes to their values, very clear about what matters, very clear about what doesn't, and not easily pulled into emotional games that lead nowhere. There's one moment in this energy that really catches my attention. It's the moment this person begins asking themselves what they may have missed all this time. Have they spent so much energy listening to outside voices that they forgot to look directly at Gemini? Have they accepted certain things as truth when they were really just someone else's interpretation? Because as the fog slowly begins to clear, the image in front of them looks more and more different from the one they were originally given. And the more they recognize that, the more they feel something shifting inside themselves in a way that's surprisingly difficult to put into words. Something happens when a person finally sees the truth clearly enough. They start losing interest in the very things that once kept them stuck. Not because those things suddenly disappear. Not because every problem gets solved overnight, but because they're no longer looking at them through the same eyes. And honestly, I feel like that's exactly where this person is right now. This is a different kind of silence. Not the silence of confusion. Not the silence of constantly searching for answers from other people. It feels more like the silence of someone asking themselves a very simple question. How much longer do I want to carry this? Because it seems like they've spent a long time moving through the same cycles, the same conversations, the same arguments, the same emotions, the same situations repeating themselves without ever truly changing. The Eight of Cups card comes through here with a deep sense of exhaustion. Not the kind of exhaustion that comes from heartbreak. More like the exhaustion of realizing you've been walking around the same corner for far too long. There were things that once felt incredibly important, things that held their attention, things that consumed their energy. But when they look back now, they seem to be asking themselves whether any of it was truly worth what it cost them. I feel like this person is beginning to look at their life from a much more honest perspective. Looking at the relationships around them. Looking at the conversations they continue to participate in. Looking at the people they've allowed into their private world. And it feels like they're realizing that not everyone belongs in the version of their life they're growing into. What's interesting is, this doesn't feel angry, it doesn't feel vengeful, it doesn't even feel resentful. It feels like acceptance, like maturity. Like walking into a room you've known your entire life and suddenly realizing you don't belong there anymore. I feel like someone is starting to understand that certain connections have remained in their life simply because of habit. Some conversations continue because of obligation. Some energies are held onto because of guilt. But keeping something doesn't automatically mean it's healthy. And that's becoming clearer and clearer. The Death card appears here, and honestly, it doesn't make me think about loss. It makes me think about freedom. It feels like someone finally becoming honest enough with themselves to say, I don't want to live like this anymore. Maybe it's the way they've been reacting to people. Maybe it's the way they've allowed outside voices to influence their thinking. Maybe it's old stories they've carried for far too long. Whatever it is, it feels like an old layer is beginning to fall away, and that process isn't always comfortable. Because when you let go of something familiar, even when it's no longer good for you, part of you still grieves it, part of you still looks back, part of you still remembers. And I think this person is moving through that feeling. They know they need to keep walking forward, but they're also learning how to let go with grace, without creating more conflict, without creating more pain, without feeling the need to prove anything to anyone. The Temperance card carries a very gentle energy here, very calm, very grounded, very mature. After spending enough time surrounded by noise, people begin craving peace, not artificial peace, not avoidance, real peace, the kind that comes from no longer fighting yourself. And I feel like that's what this person is searching for. A simpler life, a clearer mind, a healthier environment, more genuine relationships. And what's beautiful is that the more they release the things that drain them, the lighter they seem to feel. Not everything is clear yet. Not every emotion has settled. Not every question has been answered. But for the first time in a long time, it feels like they're beginning to sense balance returning. Just a little, just enough. Enough to remind them that they don't want to go back to what was pulling them down before. And as the distance between them and those old energies continues to grow, something else seems to be becoming clearer inside their heart. And it almost feels like what they've been trying to avoid all this time isn't outside of them anymore. It's inside their own heart. I feel like this person has spent so much energy analyzing everything. Analyzing the situation. Analyzing what other people said. analyzing what they should do and what they shouldn't do. But there's one thing they can't seem to analyze out of existence, no matter how hard they try. And that's how they truly feel about Gemini. What stands out to me is that this energy doesn't feel impulsive. It doesn't feel like someone suddenly woke up one morning and realized they were in love. It feels more like someone finally stopping their run from something they've known deep down for a very long time. Because sometimes feelings don't disappear just because we ignore them. Sometimes they simply remain there, quietly, patiently, waiting for all the noise around them to settle, waiting until we're honest enough to listen. And honestly, I feel like that's what's happening here. After everything they've seen, after everything they've discovered, after all the layers of information have been separated from the truth, what remains isn't what other people said. What remains is how they feel, and that feeling seems to be becoming clearer and clearer. The Ace of Cups card comes through here like water finally beginning to flow again after being blocked for a very long time. Not forcefully, not dramatically, just naturally, gently, honestly. I feel like this person is allowing themselves to feel more than they have in a long time. They're no longer trying to control every emotion, no longer trying to turn their heart into a problem that needs solving. Instead, they're learning how to sit with what their heart has been trying to tell them. And that's not always easy, because once you've seen the truth clearly enough, it's very difficult to go back to the version of yourself that existed before. There's something really beautiful about this energy. This person isn't seeing Gemini as an idea anymore. They're not seeing Gemini as a story they've been told. They're not seeing Gemini as a character in someone else's narrative. They're beginning to see Gemini as a real human being, with strengths, with flaws, with wounds, with dreams. And somehow that makes their feelings even deeper. The Lover's card carries a very important feeling here. Not the feeling of choosing between two people, not the feeling of choosing between right and wrong. It feels more like a choice between continuing to live from fear or living from truth. Because for a long time, fear seems to have held a lot of power. Fear of being hurt, fear of making a mistake, fear of facing what they genuinely feel, fear of what other people might think, fear of what could change if they acknowledged it. But I feel those fears slowly losing their grip. Not because they're completely gone, but because something inside this person is becoming stronger. A sense of clarity, a sense of honesty, an emotional maturity they may not have fully allowed themselves to step into before. The Two of Cups card appears here as a very gentle reminder. Real connections are rarely built on perfection. They're built on presence, on understanding, on two people seeing one another clearly, instead of seeing projections created by fear, assumptions, or old stories. And I feel like this person is beginning to understand that on a much deeper level than before. Maybe they don't have every answer yet. Maybe there are still things that need to be understood. Maybe there are feelings that still need time before they can be fully named. But what I do feel is that they no longer want to keep running from what their heart has been trying to say. Because after all the misunderstandings, after all the outside voices, after all the stories that were told in place of the truth, what seems to remain is something surprisingly simple, a feeling, a very real feeling. And the more they try to push it away, the more they realize it has been there all along. Gemini. You know, I think the most beautiful part of this reading isn't what was said behind the scenes. It's the way the truth seems to find its way to the surface in its own time. Because honestly, we can't control the stories other people choose to tell about us. We can't control their assumptions, their opinions, or the perspectives they decide to believe. But one thing I keep feeling throughout this entire reading is that truth has a quiet way of speaking for itself over time. And it feels like someone is beginning to see things through their own eyes instead of through someone else's lens. Wow, and sometimes that's enough to change everything. Not because the past suddenly disappears. Not because every question immediately finds an answer, but because clarity begins where borrowed opinions end. And that's a powerful thing. If something in today's reading resonated with your heart, take what feels meaningful for your own journey and gently leave the rest behind. As always, trust yourself, trust your own wisdom, trust what feels true for you. Thank you for spending this time here with me. It truly means more than you know. I appreciate every view, every comment, and every moment we get to share in this space together. You are genuinely important to me, and I'm grateful that our paths crossed here today. I hope you continue moving through your journey with a little more peace, a little more clarity, and a little more trust in yourself. Take good care of your heart, Gemini, and until we meet again in the next reading. Bye for now, Gemini.